Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's Miles here. We're back again with another chapter of The Time Twister by Jenny Nemo. Uh, Real quick, just wanted to say thank you guys for joining me. Whoever popped up in the two streams that I did. Hope you enjoyed. It was fun. Anyway, we can head on out with the next chapter. Thunder House. Henry Ubeam was bored. Cook's underground rooms were cozy and interesting, but Henry had explored every inch of them. He wished Charlie would come and talk to him, but Cook said Charlie had gone home for the weekend. Cook seemed to be very busy even on a Saturday. She had found a pair of old pajamas for Henry and some modern-looking clothes. Long trousers, black shoes, and gray socks. And she had persuaded him to exchange his warm Norfolk jacket for a blue jumper. Henry found this wasn't as warm as his jacket, but at least he still had the blue cape he was wearing when he came twisting through time. Cook had hidden the time twister. "I don't want you trying anything silly again," she said, wagging her finger at Henry. "You're here for good now. Thing is, what to do with you." Henry hadn't given up hope. There had to be a way back to 1916. Otherwise, what would become of him? He didn't want to return to Bloors, of course, but if he could just get to the right year, he would eventually reach his happy home beside the sea. "But I'll have to go through that other world first," he said to himself. The world in the Time Twister. When Henry had traveled through time, he'd briefly glimpsed the world of the Red King. His mother, who was a Bloor, had told him once that he was descended from this mysterious Red King. "Some of the king's descendants have inherited a part of his magic," Grace Bloor had said. "But as far as I can tell, none of us have." And she had looked round at her family and laughed in her playful, comforting way, and added, "Thank goodness." Henry wished he could hear her laughter again. "Charlie's got some of that magic," he said to himself. "Perhaps he could live with Charlie. That wouldn't be so bad. Charlie could teach him to use all the newfangled things Cook had told him about. Televisions, videos, computers, and other amazing things. He'd been told that Cook would be back to give him his lunch at 12:30. But according to the little clock beside Henry's bed, it was still only 10 o'clock. More than 2 hours of nothing, sighed Henry. He had an idea. Now that he was dressed like all the other boys at Bloors, surely he could do some exploring. He had always wanted to go into the ruin, but Sir Gideon had forbidden it. Now was Henry's chance. He tiptoed out of Cook's room carefully, closing the door to the cupboard behind him. After several more cupboards, he found himself outside the canteen and running towards a loud noise that was coming from the hall. He looked and saw a big man with a shaven head hammering something into the main door. Without stopping his work, the big man said, "Who might you be?" "I'm, Henry," said Henry nervously. "Henry what?" Uh, Bone?" Henry didn't know why he said Bone. He just thought it might be a bad idea to say Ubeam. "Don't seem you're very sure, do you?" the man continued hammering. "I'm quite sure, thank you," said Henry. "We've got another bone here. A real terror of a bone." "He's my cousin." "I suppose you're one of them endowed kids. Troublemakers. All of them." The man delivered a really savage blow to the door. "Broke the door. That's what the stormy one did. Blast him." "Oh," Henry continued on his way to the garden. "Taking the dog for a walk, are you?" said the man. "What?" Henry increased his stride. The dog. Miserable beast. Henry looked down to find Blessed panting at his feet. Oh, yes! Come along, he said, and walked briskly to the garden door. Once outside, Henry stopped to catch his breath. Blessed looked as nervous as he did. What's the matter? Said Henry. He bent down and patted the old dog's head. Blessed was very ugly, but there was something so sad about his solemn, wrinkled face. Henry couldn't help feeling sorry for him. There were 4 boys playing football in the snowy slush just ahead of him. They paid no attention to Henry and Blessed as they walked past. A huge tree had been sawn into logs in the center of the field, and Henry was tempted to climb on them, but time was precious, and he had to see the ruin. When they reached the great red walls, Henry felt very excited. The place smelled of age and danger. He imagined knights in armor scrambling over the walls, battle horses charging through the entrance, and arrows whizzing overhead. He was about to walk through the huge arched entrance when a voice said, "You, boy, come here." Henry turned to see 2 older boys marching towards him. They both wore purple capes and had grim, unfriendly faces. "Who are you?" shouted the taller boy. Henry plunged into the ruin. He found himself in a square courtyard with 5 passages leading out of it. Henry took the middle one. He could hear the other boys murmuring behind him. Henry ran as fast as he could. The passage opened into another open courtyard. Henry ran across it and stumbled down a flight of steep stone steps. He was now in a grassy glade ringed with headless statues. In the center of the glade, 2 girls in purple capes sat on a large stone tomb. One was very small and very dark, with long black pigtails and gold-rimmed glasses. The other had a bright, healthy-looking face and amazing blue hair. "Hello," said Henry breathlessly. You're Henry, aren't you?" said the girl with blue hair. "Charlie told me about you. They're looking for you, you know. The place was in turmoil this morning. Manfred threw loads of music books out of the tower. He was in such a fury. I'm Olivia, and this is Bindi." "I'm very glad to meet you." Henry went to shake their hands. "How do you do?" "You are polite," said Olivia. "I expect that comes from being old." "Old? I suppose people would consider me to be old. But actually, I only feel about 11. "Me too," said Olivia. "But then, I am. We wouldn't normally be here on Saturday, but we got detention." There was a shout from the courtyard above them, and Blessed came stumbling down the steps. "They must have followed the dog," muttered Henry. "2 boys chased me in here. One was very tall and wore his hair like a girl." "A ponytail?" said Olivia. "That's Manfred Bloor, the head boy." "We can't let him find you," said Bindi. "Quick, get in here." With surprising speed, the 2 girls leapt off the tomb and slid back the top. Henry stared into the dark gap. The inside of the tomb smelled of mildew and decomposing things. "Go on," said Olivia. "You can breathe in there. We've tried it." Another shout from above made Henry climb into the tomb. The girls pushed back the lid, leaving a tiny gap for air. They swung themselves back onto the top just as Manfred and Asa came rushing down the steps. "Have you seen a strange boy?" said Manfred. "We've seen Daniel Robotham," said Olivia, choosing a boy with about the same size as Henry, who also wore a blue cloak. "He went that way?" She pointed to an arched entrance in one of the walls. "Daniel Robotham." "Are you sure?" Asa's yellow eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Course we're sure," said Bindi. He was humming. Daniel always hums. Manfred and Asa rushed through the arch. There was a tap from inside the tomb. Shh, hissed Olivia. You can't come out. It's not safe yet. She was right. A few minutes later, Manfred and Asa came running back. Are you positive he went that way? Said Manfred. Cross my heart and hope to die, Olivia said blithely. But he went back up those steps about 5 minutes ago. You must have missed him. What's he done? Asked Bindi. None of your business, said Manfred. We're looking for someone, added Asa. Manfred shot him a look that said keep quiet. What's my great-grandfather's dog doing in here? Asked Manfred. We thought we'd take him for a walk, Bindi told him. The two boys turned away, but as they mounted the steps, Asa looked back and said, Why are you two in here anyway? We came for a bit of peace, Olivia sighed. The boys are so rough. I wouldn't stay in the ruin too long. Asa gave her a peculiar smile and followed Manfred up the steps. He gives me the shivers, muttered Bindi. They waited another 5 minutes before deciding it was safe enough to let Henry out. He scrambled over the side of the tomb and dropped onto the grass. His cloak and trousers were covered in green dust, and bits of cobweb clung to his hair. There's a huge toad in there, he said. I'm not very fond of toads. The girls brushed him down, and then they all three sat on the tomb and shared a bun that Bindi had managed to sneak out of the canteen. Henry told the girls about his home beside the sea and how he had come upon the time twister. Olivia recounted some of her famous mother's adventures while filming in the jungle, and then Bindi described how she had traveled to India to visit her grandparents. When the horn called them in for lunch, Olivia said, Come with us, Henry. Stay calm. Don't look nervous, and when we reach the canteen, you can slip into the kitchen. Henry had only told the girls he was hiding in the kitchens. Although he trusted them, he felt it would be safer if no one knew exactly where he was. Unfortunately, when he reached the canteen, he walked straight into a dinner lady. What are you doing here? She asked. Message for cook, stuttered Henry. She's in the cold room, the dinner lady smiled. She was young and cheerful looking. Henry made his way through the kitchen. Cook wasn't in the cool room. He tried to find the cupboard he'd come out of, but he kept blundering into broom closets and cupboards full of crockery. Cook's secret entrance seemed to have disappeared. Henry was fumbling behind a row of plastic aprons when a firm hand came down on his shoulder. Henry froze. A voice in his ear hissed, Henry Eubeam, where have you been? Henry turned to see Cook's angry red face. I just went for a little walk, he explained. Didn't I tell you not to leave here? She whispered harshly. Didn't I? Never do that again. It's dangerous out here. I'm sorry, said Henry contritely. Took you long enough to find the right place, didn't it? Cook turned a handle beside the row of aprons, and a door swung inward. Without a word, she pushed Henry through the door into a stack of mops and brooms. You'll have to find your own way now, she said. If you're lucky, you'll get lunch in half an hour. She swiftly closed the door. Henry made his way back to Cook's rooms. He sat beside the stove, feeling rather sorry for himself. Was he to spend the rest of his life like this, hiding from people who wished him harm? Why was it dangerous out there? He recalled something Manfred Bloor had said to the girls. What's my great-grandfather's dog doing in here? Who was Manfred's great-grandfather? Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. Could it? Cousin Ezekiel would be over 100 years old. It is possible, thought Henry. He shuddered. Cousin Ezekiel is still alive, and he still wants to get rid of me one way or another. Henry wished the time twister had taken him somewhere else. Charlie Bones' house, for instance. At that moment, Charlie would rather not have been in his house. He and Benjamin were sitting in the kitchen at number 9, wondering what to do. Frantic phone calls had been made between Charlie, Fidelio, and Gabriel, but no parent could be found or persuaded to give them a lift up to the heights. "We could get a taxi," Benjamin suggested. "I've got £3. Charlie didn't think that was enough. His mother was out at work and Macy was shopping. He didn't think his uncle would have any money, and he certainly couldn't ask Grandma Bone. "We're stuck." Charlie stared glumly out at the kitchen window. He had hardly spoken when a luxurious car drove into view. It pulled up right in front of number 9, and Lysander jumped out of the passenger seat. He waved at the kitchen window. Charlie scribbled a note to his mother, chucked the door key in his pocket, and ran to the front door. He opened it just as Lysander was about to ring the bell. "Hi there, Charlie," said Lysander. "My dad's going to give us a ride up to Gabriel's place." Benjamin and Runner Bean appeared behind Charlie. "Can my friend and his dog come?" asked Charlie. "Course! More the merrier," said Lysander. "Come." Benjamin, Charlie, and Runner Bean followed Lysander down the steps to the car. Lysander got in front while the others climbed in the back. They found Fidelio already tucked deep into the leather seat. "How do you do, boys?" said the very handsome black man sitting in the driver's seat. "My dad," said Lysander quickly. "He's a judge, but don't let that scare you." "How do you do, Judge?" said Benjamin and Charlie, slightly daunted by this imposing man. The car purred away from the curb, sailed down Filbert Street, round the park, and then up through the city. Up and up and up. None of them noticed the yellow taxi that was following them. The car was now climbing the steep road up to the heights. They passed several grand houses, and then they were beyond the fashionable area and skirting the borders of a wild-looking wood. The judge pulled up outside a rather dilapidated building with a very muddy yard. Hens scratched in a bed of shrubs, and a goat with large horns was chewing a bush. "This is as far as I go, boys," said the judge. "Couldn't you take us up to the top, Dad?" asked Lysander. "I'm not driving my new car up there," said his father. "Too much turbulence." As they got out, they could hear thunder rumbling in the distance. "Good luck, young fellows." The judge backed into the muddy yard, turned his car, and drove down the hill. Will he come fetch us?" asked Benjamin anxiously. "Might," said Lysander. "Might be Mum, though." A little further down the hill and out of sight of the boys, the yellow taxi had pulled up. An odd-looking creature got out. An old man in a long, dirty mackintosh. He had a white mustache, but tufts of ginger hair stuck out from under his filthy tweed cap. He paid the driver and then began to run up the hill, not moving like an old man at all, but more like a schoolboy. Charlie had never been so high above the city. The view was magnificent, but there was something unsettling about such a height and windy place. The trees behind them sighed ominously, and the thunder became more persistent. They were about to walk into the yard when Gabriel came out of the dilapidated house. He was wearing long muddy boots and splashed deliberately through the deepest puddles. His jeans were so dirty the mud hardly made a difference. "Hi," Gabriel raised his left hand. "Look, good as new." "Glad to hear it," said Lysander. "Are we all ready, then?" "Ready for anything," said Fidelio. They set off, Lysander and Gabriel leading the way. After a while, the road became rough and narrow, and then it petered out altogether. They found themselves at a gate. A wooden sign marked Thunder House had been nailed to the top bar. Beneath this, a smaller sign read, "Beware of the weather." "What does that mean?" said Benjamin. "We'll soon find out," said Fidelio. Beyond the gate, a narrow lane led between rows of dark coffiners. The tops of the trees thrashed violently in the wind that swirled overhead, and twigs, stones, and dead grass came bowling down the lane. "Here goes," said Lysander, opening the gate. "I've been here before, but it's never been this windy." The other boys followed him through. They were immediately struck by flying debris. "This isn't going to be easy," muttered Charlie. Leaning into the wind, the two leaders set off up the lane. Behind them, Fidelio, Charlie, and Benjamin walked in a huddle, with Runner Bean anxiously winding round their legs. With every step they took, the wind grew fiercer, and now sharp little bolts of hail peppered their faces. Charlie took a peek around Lysander and saw an awesome gray stone building. The roof was divided into 3 steep triangles, the middle section resembling a tower. The windows were long and narrow, and the porch roof echoed the sharp angle of the center gable. Echoed. Okay. A weather vane in the shape of a hammer whirled madly at the very top of the building. Every now and again the whole building shook violently. As they drew nearer to the house, the porch door opened, and out came a man with frizzy blonde hair and a beard to match. He must have been nearly 7 feet tall, because he banged his head on the top of the door frame when he stepped through it. "It's no use," the big man roared as the boys battled their way towards the door. "I've tried to calm him down, but we've got to let this storm blow itself out." "We need him, Mr. Torson," Lysander shouted through the wind. I know. But Tancred's got this weather thing worse than I have. I can't manage him at all." The determined gang had now reached the shelter of the house. Not that it gave much protection. The wind came at them from every direction, tearing their hair and making their eyes stream with tears. Mr. Torson stood with his arms across his chest, braced against the hail that battered his broad back. "I've tried to reason with him." He coughed. A deep rumble echoed somewhere in his chest. "He's locked himself in his room. Furniture's probably to smithereens by now. My wife!" He gave another cough, this one coinciding with a bolt of lightning that came sizzling down a nearby tree. They all watched the tree crash to the ground, its feathery branches alight with flames. They were soon put out, however, by the deluge that suddenly poured from the sky. In a brief moment of quiet before the next clap of thunder, Mr. Torson said sadly, "My poor wife's got a terrible headache." "Can we just come in and talk to Tancred?" begged Lysander. "Not a chance," said Mr. Torson, planting himself firmly inside the porch. "It's too dangerous. You'll just have to come back another time. Be careful on the way back. There's something out there." "What?" Gabriel began. His next words were drowned by a furious crack of thunder, and they all found themselves ducking. Something hit the ground with a heavy thud right behind them. Runner Bean howled hysterically, and Benjamin shouted, What was that?" "A hammer," said Mr. Torson. He disappeared into the house, and they heard the rattle of locks and bolts behind the door. "Well, that's that, I guess," sighed Lysander. "Let's go back through the wood. There'll be more shelter under the trees." They raced to the wood, but Runner Bean, barking with excitement, began to dig at the ground. "What's the matter with him?" said Charlie. "He's found the hammer," said Benjamin breathlessly. "Runner, here, boy. Leave it. Now. It's not a bone." The wood was full of thorny bushes and brambles that scratched their faces and tore their clothes, and there was something else. A feeling of being watched. "I don't like this," muttered Lysander. "Let's try to get back to the lane." The lane couldn't be found. They fanned out, calling to each other as they searched. Not this way. Can't see it. Help, we're lost. Must be this way. Not here. All at once, Charlie found himself alone. It had become very dark. Thunder still grumbled in the distance, but the trees were eerily still. And then he saw the terrible eyes. Twin pools of light moving closer through the undergrowth. With a yell of terror, Charlie turned and threw himself at a tangle of bushes. Help! He shouted. Help! Where are you guys? He could hear barking, but it was difficult to tell where it came from. Runner! He shouted. Runner Bean! Here, boy! There was a deep snarl behind him, and Charlie hurled himself away from it. He tore through the wood, banging into trees, tripping, falling, scrambling on his knees, until he saw a pale strip of road. He crawled out onto it and looked up to see 4 boys staring at him in horror. Charlie, you look a real mess, Fidelio exclaimed. You don't look so good yourself, said Charlie. How did you find the road? We'd still be in the wood if it wasn't for Runner, said Gabriel. What happened to you, Charlie? We called and called. Didn't hear, said Charlie. He got to his feet and shook the twigs out of his hair. There was something in there. An animal. I know. We heard it, said Lysander grimly. Whatever it was, it didn't want us in those woods. Let's get away from here. They staggered back to Gabriel's house and found the inside of the ramshackle building surprisingly warm and comfortable. When the boys had cleaned themselves at the kitchen sink, they fell into their chairs and gazed at mounds of roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, and vegetables, not knowing where to start. Charlie, your mom was on the telephone, said Mrs. Silk. I told her you'd gone for a walk with your friends and would be back here for tea. Thanks, Mrs. Silk. Charlie wondered if his mother had got his note. He wouldn't put it past Grandma Bone to have hidden it. Gabriel had 3 sisters who squeezed themselves in between the boys and kept up an endless stream of chatter. The boys were too exhausted to join in. Lysander hardly said a word throughout the meal. Not a very promising start to the new term, is it? Said Mrs. Silk. What with Gabriel's hand and all? She was a neat, pretty woman with brown blue eyes and brown curly hair. Not a bit like Gabriel. It wasn't easy having an endowed child in the family, but Mrs. Silk did her best. She had no idea where Gabriel's strange talent, if you could call it that, came from. She and her husband were always arguing about which side of the family was responsible for it. She had a strong suspicion that it came from the Silks, some of whom were peculiar to say at least. Gabriel could never wear second-hand clothes as they were not a rich family, and they were not a rich family. Mrs. Silk often had to buy second-hand things for the girls. They found this very unfair. After tea, Gabriel took his friends to see his famous gerbils, and then it was late. Mrs. Silk drove everyone to their own front doors in a battered Land Rover. Hope your mom wasn't worried, she called as Charlie climbed the steps of number 9. Macy met him in the hall. The U-beams are here, she muttered. I'm off to watch my telly. Good luck, Charlie. And that's the end of this chapter. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.